Brothers and sisters, we have the awesome pleasure of being here with one of my sons, actually. I've been knowing this young man since he was in college, actually, maybe before he was in college.
No, it was college. Yeah, yeah. Coming to your house with my brother.
Yeah, they used to study here with my son, the whole group. So it's good to have you here on this 4th of July to talk about this 4th of July, to read the speech that Frederick Douglass made back in, when was that? 18 what?
18 July 5th, 1852.
Okay,
He
can you?
wouldn't do it on July 4th. He was scheduled to speak. He refused to speak on July 4th at the Women's Coalition in Rochester, New York. And he refused to speak on July 4th. So the speech was given July 5th, 1852.
All right, can you read us what the brother had to say about the 4th of July and who invited him and who was he making the speech to?
He was making a speech to the Women's Coalition in Rochester, New York. He had been invited. Most likely they were a group of abolitionists because there were women's suffrage groups that supported um, um, Frederick, of course, Harriet Tubman, and Sojourner Truth. And these three were part of the Freedom Church, the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, which gave strong leadership by their activity and their voice and their organizing. Various bishops of that denomination undergirding. Of course, Frederick Douglass was a licensed preacher. He had been licensed in an AME Zion Church in New Bedford, New York. And it was there that he later would cause and pressure Lincoln into making the Emancipation Proclamation. And Lincoln had a wire go directly from his telegraph station in D.C. Directly to New Bedford, New York. That's part of the question during New Year's Eve, when during the watch night service, the song comes up, "Watchmen, what of the hour?" because they were watching for the news of the Emancipation Proclamation. So New Year's Eve took on a new form after that. It took on a new form of liberation and deliverance from the announcement, because as we all know, the Emancipation Proclamation did nothing to free the slaves. But earlier in 1852, Frederick gave this speech, and here are some of its most important statements. So if you want me to, I will read his statements there.
In 1 second,
Sure.
Reverend, I want to talk about you for a moment. Give us a little bit of your background. I mean, I've been knowing you, and I call you my son because you are,
Thank you.
and a very committed, diligent son. I have no negative thoughts of you at any time or complaints. And all of you young men who spent so much time in my house, I am proud of you. Give me a little of your background, and then we will go into Frederick Douglass' speech.
Well, I was born in 1962 in Far Rockaway, New York. I claim South Carolina as home because it's my mother's home. And that's where you and I almost believe we are really blood related, because your hometown is just down the road on number 9 in Lancaster, South Carolina.
Correct.
My mom is from Chester, South Carolina, like I said, down the road from your hometown. And my dad was from Marion Station, Crisfield, Maryland, on the Eastern Shore. I was raised in the holiness religion known as the Church of God. Now, that was Anderson, Indiana. Its headquarters was Anderson, Indiana. It's equally interesting that Anderson, Indiana was the home headquarters the Ku Klux Klan. But that church developed out of it, and it made inroads into the Black community. And in many of its urban centers in the holiness religion, that's where I grew up in the church. I became a believer in 1977 and received a call to ministry in 1979, 1978 rather. My pastor let me stew for 2 years, and when I was 18 years old, I graduated from high school and Bible school at the same time, and he licensed me to preach. All along of my development, I was placed in charge of the adult Sunday school. I was given charge to have leadership in the outreach programs into the community and into nursing homes. I met your son in 1980. He was attending Brooklyn College. I was attending York College. And subsequently, I became the president of the York College Christian Fellowship, known as JOY, which was an acronym for Jesus, Others, and You. Clinton and I used to meet up at a missionary training house for InterVarsity in Nyack, New York. And there we developed Black Students Christian Union. And we would go there in the month of October around Christmas, Columbus Day, and we would talk about issues concerning Christians who are Black, Christians of African descent. And there is where a great deal of my hunger grew for the knowledge of self. One thing I recognize that Christ does, as you are introduced to God, God then turns around and introduces you to yourself. And that started the quest, as I met many African scholars in InterVarsity. Carl F. Ellis Jr. I got turned on to Columbus Sally in his book, What Color is Your God?, which originally was Your God is Too White. Carl had a book called Beyond Liberation, and that opened my mind because it was the first time that I had ever come across anyone saying that Augustine was an African. And it made me mad that the Christian world would hide from his brothers and sisters. They have this love of Augustine. They have a debt to Augustine in the development of systematic theology. But they really don't make it known that this man's an African who had major influence on the Christian church. Subsequently, that put me on the road, and my relationship with Clemson grew closer and closer. We are brothers. I'm your son because Clemson and I are brothers from other mothers. And we would eat in your house. This Christian fellowship, these children of African descent who were decisively Christian would meet in your house.
Yes.
And plan what we were going to do for the future in building and bringing liberation and bringing community development to our people. That we were going to develop housing and schools and meet the needs of our community because we understood the freedom that we had in Christ, who turned us on to being people of African descent. That study continued. Consequently, Clemson was a part of my wedding. He is uncle to my children, and so and you, in my own development, I went off and got my degrees from the community college in Long Island City. And then consequently, I went and got $1 million African education in the department that you were educated in, the Africana Studies Department at the City University, City College of New York. And there I was trained by Dr. Leonard Jeffries. I was trained by Professor James Smalls. I was influenced and trained by Professor Scobie. I was trained by Professor Kitimi from Kenya. I was trained by Professor Perezi Kumanari, who was the permanent ambassador to the United Nations. I was trained by Sister Eugenia Baines. I was trained by Dr. Shashi McIntyre. I was trained by Sister Jerry Price. I was trained by so many who came in and out of the country from Africa, that this famous and long-standing department, I was also blessed to be trained by those who trained my professors, Dr. John Henry Clarke, Dr. Ben. I consequently became and made friends with Walter McCrae, the author of Black Presence in the Bible and the publisher of the Dean of Black Studies, Dr. Charles B. Kofer. Those influences helped me to sharpen the vision that God had given me to minister to my people. I consequently, in that vein, resigned from, I moved from the Church of God in Far Rockaway to the historic church that has the longest or the oldest history of a continuous Black denomination and congregation in the borough of Brooklyn. That's Varick Memorial AME Zion Church. Started out in Williamsburg, then moved to Brooklyn and became the Ralph Avenue, then moved to his current place on Quincy in Brooklyn. And I studied and was mentored by one of the progenitors of liberation theology. And that would be the Reverend Dr. Calvin B. Marshall III, who actually came out of the Church of God also in Brooklyn. His father pastored the Lafayette Avenue Church of God. And Dr. Marshall poured into me. I began reading him a great deal and trying to wonder why the Church of God didn't speak of him. But he had written an article in the Black Scholar that he had given at the Princeton chapter called "The Black Church's Mission is Liberation." I had befriended the Reverend Dr. William Augustus Jones, who also poured into me the teachings of liberation theology, and influenced by his books, God in the Ghetto, Responsible Preaching, The Black Church, Past, Present, and Future. Dr. Jones had a thing of saying about the Black community that we move, organize, and have movement a great deal from our pain predicament. And so I find it so today. And so my love of you, as we would meet up, as I could find you anywhere in Brooklyn, anywhere in Manhattan, anywhere, filming the movements of our people during that era, and the scholars. The work that you have done with TransAtlantic production is phenomenal. And there will be times you will allow me to work a camera or help you move your equipment. And we became endeared to each other. And so I love you dearly.
Thank you.
I am grateful for what you have poured into my life and allowed me to be who I am.
Thank you, Reverend Teagle. I love that deep bass voice, that when you really get into it, the seats that one is sitting in start to tremble. So I've been looking forward to hearing you bless this audience with the words and the spirit of Frederick Douglass as he responded to an invitation as a guest and a speaker on the 4th of July. Would you, I'm not going to interrupt you anymore. Yeah. I just want you to go ahead on.
Consequently, he gave this in Rochester, New York. And of course, you know what Rochester means to Frederick Douglass, because after New Bedford, Massachusetts, Rochester became his base from which he published one of the early black periodicals, the North Star. And so this is his speech. What to the slave is your 4th of July, given 1852, July 5th. Fellow citizens, pardon me. Allow me to ask why I am called upon to speak here today. What have I or those I represent to do with your national independence? Are these great principles of political freedom and of national justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? And am I therefore called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us? Would to God, both for your sake and ours, that an affirmative answer could be truthfully returned to these questions. But such is not the state of the case. I say it with a sad sense of disparity between us. I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals an immeasurable distance between us. The blessing in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not me. The sunlight that brings light and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I mourn. To drag a man in feathers into the grand illuminated temple of liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems were inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me to speak today? If so, this is a parallel to your conduct. And let me warn you that it is dangerous to copy the example of a nation whose crimes, towering up to heaven, were thrown down by the breath of the Almighty, burying that nation in an irrevocable ruin. I can today take up the plaintive lament of a peeled and woe-smitten people. Fellow citizens, above your national tumultuous joy, I hear the mournful wails of millions whose chains, heavy and grievous yesterday, are today rendered more intolerable by the jubilee shouts that reach them. If I do forget, if I do not faithfully remember those bleeding children of sorrow, this day, may my right hand forget her cunning, and may my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. To forget them, to pass lightly over their wrongs, and to chime in with the popular theme would be treason most scandalous and shocking, and would make me a reproach before God and the world. My subject, then, fellow citizens, is American slavery. I shall see this day, and its popular characteristics from the slave's point of view, standing there identified with the American bondman, making his wrongs mine, I do not hesitate to declare with all my soul that the character and conduct of this nation has never looked more blacker to me than on this 4th of July. Whether we turn to the declarations of the past or to the professions of the present, the conduct of the nation seems equally hideous and revolting. America is false to the past, false to the present, and solemnly binds herself to be false to the future, standing with God and the crushed and bleeding slaves on this occasion. I will, in the name of humanity, which is outraged, in the name of liberty, which is fettered, in the name of the Constitution and the Bible, which are disregarded and trampled upon, dare to call in question and to denounce with all the emphasis I can command everything that serves to perpetuate slavery, the great sin and shame of America. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will use the severest language I can command, and yet not one word shall escape me that any man whose judgment is not blinded by prejudice or who is not at heart a slaveholder shall not confess to be right and just. But I fancy I hear someone of my audience say, it is just in this circumstance that you and your brother abolitionists fail to make a favorable impression on the public mind. Would you argue more and denounce less? Would you persuade more and rebuke less? Your case would be much more likely to succeed. But I submit, where all is plain, there is nothing to be argued. What point in the anti-slavery creed would you have me argue? On what branch of the subject do the people of this country need light? Must I undertake to prove that the slave is a man? That point is conceded already. Nobody doubts it. The slaveholders themselves acknowledge it in the enactment of laws for their government. They acknowledge it when they punish disobedience on the part of the slave. There are 72 crimes in the state of Virginia, which, if committed by a black man, no matter how ignorant he be, subject him to the punishment of death, while only 2 of the same crimes shall subject a white man to the like punishment. What is this but the acknowledgement that the slave is a moral, intellectual, and responsible being? The manhood of the slave is conceded. It is admitted in the fact that the Southern statute books are covered with enactments forbidding, under severe fines and penalty, the teaching of the slave to read or write. When you can point to any such laws in reference to the beast of the field, then I may consent to argue the manhood of a slave. When the dogs in your streets, when the fowl of the air, when the cattle of your hills, when the fish of the sea, when the reptiles that crawl shall be unable to distinguish the slave from a brute, then I will argue with you that the slave is a man. For the present, it is enough to affirm the equal manhood of the Negro race. It is not astonishing that while we are plowing, planting, and reaping, using all kinds of mechanical tools, erecting houses, constructing bridges, building ships, working in metal of brass, iron, copper, silver, and gold, that while we are reading, writing, ciphering, acting as clerks, merchants, and secretaries, having among us lawyers, doctors, ministers, poets, authors, editors, orators, and teachers, that while we are engaged in all manner of enterprises common to other men, digging gold in California, capturing the whale in the Pacific, feeding sheep and cattle on the hillside, living, moving, acting, thinking, planning, living in families as husbands, wives, and children, and above all, confessing and worshiping the Christian God, and looking hopefully for life and immortality beyond the grave, we are called upon to prove that we are men? Would you have me argue that man is entitled to liberty, that he is the rightful owner of his own body? Would you, or have you already declared it? Must I argue the wrongfulness of slavery? Is that a question for Republicans? Is it to be settled among the rules of logic and argumentation as a matter beset with great difficulty, involving a doubtful application of the principle of justice, hard to be understood? How should I look today in the presence of Americans, dividing and subdividing a discourse to show that men have a natural right to freedom? Speaking of it relatively and positively, negatively and affirmatively, to do so would be to make myself ridiculous and to offer an insult to your understanding. There is not a man beneath the canopy of heaven that does not know that slavery is wrong for him. What am I to argue? That it is wrong to make men brutes, rob them of their liberty, to work them without wages, to keep them ignorant of their relations to their fellow men, to beat them with sticks, to flay their flesh with the lash, to load their limbs with iron, to hunt them with dogs, to sell them at auction, to sunder their families, to knock out their teeth, to burn their flesh, to starve them into obedience and submission to their masters? Must I argue that a system thus marked with blood and stained with pollution is wrong? No, I will not. I have better employments for my time and strength than such arguments would imply. What then remains to be argued? It is that slavery is not divine, that God did not establish it, or that our doctors of divinity are mistaken. There is blasphemy in the thought. That which is inhuman cannot be divine. Who can reason with such a preposition? They that can, may, I cannot. The time for such argument is past. At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument, is needed. Oh, had I the ability and could I reach the nation's ear, I would today pour out a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. For it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened. The conscience of the nation must be roused. The propriety of the nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed, and its crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced. What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that revealed to him more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciation of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence. Your shouts of liberty and equality are hollowed mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all its religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. Allow me to say in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture I have this day presented of the state of this nation, I do not despair of this country. There are forces in operation which must inevitably work the downfall of slavery. Nations do not now stand in the same relations to each other that they did ages ago. No nation can now shut itself up from the surrounding world and trot around in the same old paths as its fathers without interference. The time was when such could be done. Long established customs of hurtful character could formally fence themselves in and do their evil work with social impunity. Knowledge was then confined and enjoyed by the privileged few, and the multitude walked on in mental darkness. But a change has now come over the affairs of mankind. Walled cities and empires have become unfashionable. The arm of commerce has borne away the gates of the strong city. Intelligence is penetrating the darkest corners of the globe. It makes its pathway over and under the sea, as well as on the earth. Wind, steam, and lightning are its charter agents. Oceans no longer divide, but link nations together. Boston and London is now a holiday excursion. Space is comparatively annihilated.
I want to thank you, my brother. This is July 4th, 2020. Are there any real meaningful changes from the time Frederick Douglass made that speech until today, and we'll close with your commentary.
Yeah, there have been changes in that chattel slavery has been put to an end. And yet there is a different kind of slavery that has to be worked through. The slavery of trauma. African people suffer from post-traumatic slave syndrome. And it has marked our DNA largely with fear. The fear that we can come together. And so because of this fear, we have to continue to struggle. Aluta continua. The struggle continues for liberation and freedom within the African community. And as the African community struggles within herself to self-determine, to work cooperatively, to build institutions and industry that will sustain her across the globe, in these United States and across the globe. The willingness to fight within and to fight our struggles without. The struggle continues, and we have the illusion that just because some of us may have a credit card, or some of us can go on cruises, or some of us can buy homes outside of a suffering neighborhood, and some of us have acquired some materials, or that there have been political strivings that have been accomplished. We fooled ourselves. The nation was fooled by a hideous lie that because President Obama or President Barack Hussein Obama and his family became the first president of African descent, there was a lie that was resounding throughout the country that slavery was over and the achievement for blacks have happened. No, the achievement for blacks have not happened because reparations haven't been paid. And though there are individuals who make certain achievements, the ground is not level yet. We must work for equality. We must work for justice. We must maintain liberation, and we must continue to inform ourselves about ourselves, about our God, about our people, about our history, about our culture, because in some measure, what we seek to do now has been done. And we need to learn from that which has been left to us by our ancestors, where we need to look again at the model of Black Wall Street, of Glenwood, Anderson, and Pine, before that African village was destroyed. We need to look at IT, North Carolina, and its survival. We need to remember that even in New York, an African village has been established. And though through what Senator Patrick Daniel Moynihan said, to leave our communities to, what was the term?
Benign neglect.
Benign neglect. In other words, a nice way of saying, let it rot. And we'll come in and take over the properties. We'll come in and take over the schools. We'll come in and we'll finance ourselves to take the homes for nothing and raise them to prices that are unfathomable. And so again, we must rise up and find the strength within ourselves to create the African village within these United States. And that village must again be child-centered. adult rule, adult managed, and elder rule. We must teach our children, young people, and even young adults the worth of our elders because of their wisdom. I say often to my students, you got to live to get old. But we must, as elders, learn to use the strength. Once again, as James Bevel and Diane Nash had put youngsters on the march in Alabama and Mississippi and on the freedom rides, it is young people once again who are in the streets in the movement known as Black Lives Matter. But Black Lives Matter has want to build a solid relationship with its elders. It's all right that you do not want to have what is known as permanent leadership, but there should be a counsel that you need to hear, and their wisdom you need as a guide, as the power of your strength in these streets move this nation towards justice. May God help us find tranquility in these lands. May God help us to achieve the general welfare of the people. It is not present now in our leadership. The office of the president has been made to be a bastardization of what democratic leadership is about. There is a tyrant now who has already claimed himself to be a nationalist, and it was a dog whistle. He wasn't saying that he was a black nationalist. He was saying in code, I'm a white nationalist and support white supremacy. And this is a dying breed. It is a dying breed because of what Francis Cress Welsing brought to light. That genetically, white supremacy cannot be sustained. Because every time you turn around, there's an African child either being adopted or born, even within the white race. And so, you better learn, as Dr. King said to us, how to live together as brothers, or it is certain this pestilence which plagues us is a sign that points towards judgment to the human race. And we must definitely strive to live as brothers, or we will perish as fools.
Thank you. Thank you.